Iron Horse, thank you so much for joining me.
No problem, Kaz. Thanks for hosting the show today.
No problem.
The debate.
And, I got my little live chat here popped out, ready to go. Welcome everybody who followed us over here from Modern Day Debates. Really appreciate you guys joining us. Sideshow Nav, Sadie Marie, Hannah Anderson, Lame Duck, everybody. So, Iron Horse, how do you feel about the debate?
Yeah, I think it was okay. I was just a bit disappointed with my internet signal here. I was missing out on a lot of the things that you and TJump were saying, unfortunately, and I would have liked to have given it a lot more attention than I was able to. But apart from that, the last bit went pretty clearly. I could hear you both. It was good.
Okay. So, one thing that stood out to me towards the end there was that this isn't necessarily religiously motivating. You're not religiously motivated necessarily. Is that right?
No, not necessarily. No, not in anything. I think religion and philosophy, well, they're interrelated, but I think religion is basically an old-fashioned word for I don't know, for having a belief for something that you can't understand. And I think it served its purpose. You know, I got over religion in my teens. I used to go to church. I grew up with it. I loved it. You know, the Easter and Christmas things were wonderful as a child. But as you get older and you grow up out of it, I started looking into Eastern mysticism around the age of 16, 17. And it's not religion. It's all about, it's philosophy and how much you can, I think, understand anything. And basically, philosophy of reality is as much to do with physics as it is to do with spiritual beliefs. And my whole heliocentric belief way back then was my spiritual belief. I believed I lived in a spinning ball in a very special Goldilocks zone in this special distance away from the sun. And it was all perfectly designed, obviously, by some sort of creator, perhaps, or I didn't believe in random freak chance accident back then because there's too many coincidences for it to be just that. And so to eventually come to the point where I believe I live on a stationary planar Earth, I think it gives me a more spiritual understanding of our existence because it makes this Earth, this realm, more special than just being a random freak chance blue speck floating in outer space. So it's not religious, it is spiritual. And for some, I can understand why it's religious because that's what's important to them. They want to have religious belief. But for me, no, it's not necessarily religious as per se.
Okay. But it's there's like a deep connection there for you. There's some kind of sense of awe that goes along with it. Is that about right?
Well, yeah, I've always had a sense of awe of existence. I think everything is miraculous if you really look at it. You know, you can look at an earthworm digging it up, and if you can really appreciate it for what it is, you know, a self-replicating bunch of molecules that can live and survive and does all these amazing things for the soil. I mean, everything really, if you really stopped and looked at it, is awesome. And I think that's what we're often missing is we tend to take too much for granted without really stopping and looking at the little things and realizing, you know, a simple leaf on a tree is awesome. The things that it can do. Yeah. There's awe everywhere if you really stop and look at it. And yeah, I don't think that looking on the big picture necessarily changes or makes it any more awesome.
I feel that way too. I agree. But something like this, right? The shape of the planet that we live on, that's something that can be established as a matter of fact. You'd agree, right?
Well, that's what I used to believe, but I don't think so now. I think all facts have been thrown out the window because we're discovering too many things that contradict the belief of the shape of a planet, or even the belief that planets exist. I don't think we're on a planet. You know, right. Planet is basically the derivative of the word which means wandering star in the ancient Greek, and I don't think we're on a wandering star. I think we're on a plane, and that Earth, terra firma, I think the only terra firma in existence, which makes it more special in a sense, but I don't have the need for it to be special in order to believe it in the first place. I just think, wow, if it is, it's pretty mind-blowing, and it does place us in a pretty significant place in the whole overall scheme of things.
My question is more like, we could throw away everything that anybody has said about this subject completely. We could just forget about all of it. Everything that anybody said about the globe or the flat earth, just throw it all out the window, start over from scratch, and discover, as a matter of fact, what the shape of this thing that we live on is. That's something that we could establish and agree upon, hypothetically speaking, at least, right?
I think sometimes that's what you need to do, because the minute you go into something with presuppositions or assumed beliefs, then you're automatically going in with confirmation bias. But if you do forget everything you know that you know nothing, and start from scratch, then you definitely got a better ability to at least, I don't know, just at least at least entertain a new concept that you never really entertained before, right, such as infinite planar Earth.
Okay, so it's not like we have some kind of difference of like total epistemic divide here. There were some things I wrote down during the discussion that I wanted to address with you. Something you said about density determining weight. You remember saying something like that? Can you go back over that, or just make sure? I just want to be super clear before I try to play with that idea.
Yeah, well, pretty much, everything sort of back engineers on the back of everything. So when we're talking about something of mass, I mean, a lot of people struggle with what mass even is. So we just have to assume that an object has mass, and that mass is determined by its volume, and then the weight of that volume is determined by the density of the volume. So, if you've got a 5 centimeter cube block of lead, it's obviously got less volume than a 10 centimeter block of lead, but they both have the same density. And so if you know what the density of one is, then you can extrapolate the weight of the other, because obviously 5 kilo or 5 centimeter, whatever, is going to be half what the 10 centimeter one is. So in a sense, by understanding density per volume, that's how you determine weight.
And we both agree that density is mass over volume, right?
Well, yeah, they are interchangeable. Yes, but you can still have the same mass of something. But like when you say mass, it's basically the combination of density per volume. So as I say, they're interchangeable, but you can still have the same mass, like a kilograms cubed of marshmallow, and that's the same mass, like massive amount or volume, but it's going to be completely different density, and therefore it's a different weight. So it's a three-way sort of relationship.
Two things with the same mass but different volumes have different density, right?
Yeah, mass and volume and density, they've all got to be taken into consideration together, and you can't just say it's one or the other. They all have to be taken into consideration.
But which one determines the weight?
The density. The density, the molecular density. So we've assumed atomic weight, we've assumed molecular weight.
Okay.
Due to density, and according to the table of elements, those things have a scale of density per volume, and those things will determine the weight.
Okay, here's my next question then. Would you agree that something like water displacement is a viable way of measuring volume?
Yeah, because water can't be compressed. So yes, if you measure the amount of water that's displaced, then technically, yes, that's the volume of the object that's displaced. Yeah.
Okay. I asked that question just to make sure that we have the similar idea of what volume is. So if that's the case, let's say I have 2 marshmallows, okay, that I have measured to be identical mass. Okay. One marshmallow I stick in the microwave and heat it up until it expands. So now it has a different volume. Now I take the marshmallows and I measure them again to make sure that they have the same mass still. And then I drop them. Are you saying that which one will drop first?
In an example like that, I would say that the one that hasn't expanded will drop first because A, it's got less air resistance because of its size, and you said the word mass to say you measured them to say they got the same mass. I think what you really meant is you measured them to say they got the same weight. So they've got the same weight, but now they've got a different air resistance because the expanded one is full of more air, a bit like the styrofoam ball example that I used, is that the more air it's got, it becomes a bit of a container of air. And so air will give itself a certain amount of buoyancy. You won't notice it as much on a small scale, but an object full with more air will have more buoyancy than an object that doesn't. Same as like when you put a log into water, it will float, but as the air molecules in the log get saturated with water, it's still the same log, but the air content of it is less. So then it doesn't float as much, so it will sink. So it's kind of on a scale, if you can relate to that. So
I realize now that if I were to do this experiment, it would have to be in a vacuum chamber. And practically speaking, in a vacuum chamber, marshmallows are not going to work. I'm going to have to think about
in a
it a little bit
vacuum,
harder.
everything in a vacuum, anything and everything is going to drop at exactly the same rate.
Well, I'm just saying.
I mean, even a helium balloon.
If you try to microwave expanded marshmallows and then stick them in a vacuum chamber, it's just going to explode. Like it's not going to.
Well, they'll lose.
I need to think of something else that I can expand and expand the volume of without it disintegrating, because the marshmallow is it's too flimsy. But I think you get the idea of that there, and I think that I've illustrated the point there enough that we can revisit that at another time. So I'm going to move on unless you want to keep talking about it.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So things just fall. That was a point that you guys got stuck on a lot. And I still don't get the point you're making about why things fall.
Okay, well, I think it's pretty straightforward myself. Like if I'm holding something like what TJump was doing, holding it, he is giving it resistance with his muscular mass and his density of his things. But when he removes the resistance, then this thing of mass has more mass than the surrounding air. And so it will drop until it reaches a place that gives it resistance. So resistance due to relative density is the force. And if there's no density or very little density, then you got no resistance or very little resistance. So most things in the medium of air, which has next to no resistance, will just drop straight through it, unless they're lighter of air, in which case they rise. But because most things are more dense than air, they will drop through it if you haven't given it some other resistant force to stop them from doing so.
So the thing that would make this, the thing to argue against this idea would be something that is less dense than air, but doesn't fall. Huh.
If it's less dense than air, then it would be like the helium balloon, it will rise.
Right. Just trying to think of well, I don't have the brain power to think that fast, so okay.
And to use that same example then, if you put that in a vacuum chamber, then the helium balloon actually sinks because you got the density of the balloon itself containing the helium. It will actually sit on the bottom of where the knot's tied. But the helium is trying to escape. The balloon contains it. but the density of the rubber itself sinks. Put it back into the medium of air, which is more dense than a vacuum, and the whole thing rises, because even air is more dense than the combination of the rubber balloon and the helium inside of it. So really everything can be simply equated to relative density, and the relative part is relative to the medium that surrounds it. So you have to take into account the medium. And obviously most people just don't think of the air. They don't think of it as a medium. They just think of it as nothing. Whereas air is still something. But the ground or the floor or whatever is dense. And the same in the vacuum chamber. You've still got the floor. It's still quite dense. You can't have the vacuum without it. And so that's where anything of any amount of mass that cannot escape into its gaseous components and dissipate out through the vacuum pump, it's still going to sink. It's just
right.
the
So the
observable
balloon
law
is
of
in
physics.
the balloon is in the air, and it is, as a whole, less dense than the air around it. And so you're saying because of that, it's going to rise, right?
The helium balloon, yes.
Because of buoyancy. Right. I'm tracking.
Well, yeah, that's right. Relative density is
Relative
buoyancy. Yes.
Relative density is buoyancy. Okay. So, and then in a vacuum chamber, we take the same balloon, we put it in a vacuum chamber, and you're saying it's still going to fall, and that's because why?
Sorry, I got that delay there. It's because the relative density of the surrounding medium becomes less than the density of what's inside the balloon, because it's nothing.
It was
So
already
helium then
less, right?
therefore has its weight. No, the helium was less, but now it's become greater than its medium, its environment. So therefore, because it's greater, it sinks. Because there is no resistance from the medium, because there's no medium. You basically remove the medium to be virtually zero.
You remove the medium, and now the helium
That's the
greater
definition of a vacuum.
than its air environment, and so it sinks.
Yeah.
The balloon was
if whatever your density is greater than your external medium, you'll sink. If you're lesser than your external medium, you'll float.
If you're lesser than your external medium, you'll float. Do I have
like
this
if you're in water, if you're in water and your lungs are full of air, you'll float. If you fill your lungs full of water, you'll drown. You sink, because you become overall more dense than the water. But because your lungs act like a flotation device with enough air inside of them, you can float. It's a similar sort of thing to anything relative to the environment that you're in, the medium, that's your environment. So if your helium balloon has more overall density than nothing, the vacuum, it sinks. If you've got air in there, well, helium is less dense than air, so it floats.
Okay. I get your model there. I see how it works there.
Cool.
All right. Yeah, I get it. I get what you're saying there. I'm not sure what a scientist would say in response to that. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm just not sure. Okay.
Well, I think we're all scientists in a way. That's what I like to think. I like to think that anybody with a critical thinking mind is a scientist, and that we've also got the benefit that scientists from the past didn't have, is that we've got the accumulated years, of decades of knowledge that a lot of them just had to work out for themselves. Whereas we have the benefit now; we can learn from hundreds of them, dozens of them, whatever. There's not that many that get taught about in the schools or whatnot, but there's that much information available to us now, and with the age of information, with the internet, we can access virtually anything that anyone believed, hopefully, if we check our sources pretty well, to really have a pretty good idea of what they thought, and then apply that to a modern understanding with more modern. Like, they didn't even have vacuum chambers back then. They didn't have electricity. They didn't have electrical pumps. They didn't have perspex. They couldn't even make a simple chamber. Where now any guy, well, not any guy, but you got quite a few really cool guys on YouTube now who do these scientific experiments with their vacuum chambers all the time. So you can watch what happens when you put a water balloon in a vacuum chamber. You can watch what happens when they put flies in a vacuum chamber. They can't fly because they've lost the ability to project themselves because the vacuum doesn't have enough density in it to be able to fly. There's that many different things we can watch now and see from other people's examples that people from hundreds of years ago could have only dreamt about. We are at the forefront of knowledge at the moment for things that, they wouldn't have even thought about, let alone rockets inside a vacuum. That sort of stuff, they couldn't have even thought of it. And so all they can do is hypothesize and assume what might happen in a vacuum under those conditions, but they've never been able to test it for themselves.
Okay, so here's where I want to go, and thank you, Heat Shield, for helping me out with this. This is where my brain was farting at. I agree with everything you said there, right? About I'm just totally stipulate to all of that. Okay, the buoyancy, sinking, all that, right? The question though is the balloon in the vacuum chamber. It has a greater relative density than the medium around it, and therefore it sinks, right? Those are your words. So the question is, why sink? Why not simply sit still?
Well, again, that just goes back to the very start of the observations of physics. Like, even when Newton got hit by an apple when it fell from the tree, is that the very first thing you do in any scientific endeavor is make the observation first. Does water find its level? Yes, it does. So we say, well, water finds its level. It will fill its container and it will form a flat surface. That's what water does. So if we're going to talk about why something does what it does, then the first thing you do is make the observation, say that it does it. Then we can extrapolate why it does. And if we say, well, because it has more density than the surrounding medium, that is what it does. We don't really have to give it a why once we realize that that is what it will do under every circumstance, under every test, under every observation we can make. What does it do under the observable laws of physics? That's what it does. We don't have to extrapolate invisible pulling forces that are required to make a spinning space ball possible in order to observe the natural laws of physics. It comes down to that. We just observe the natural laws of physics.
Sure, we don't have to do that. I agree, but it still beleaguers the mind to say, okay, we know that it happens, and we're just going to leave it at that. I don't think that's in human nature to just observe something that happens all the time and just say, well, that's just how it is. Let it be that. Uh-oh. I think you froze. Oh, no. He's probably going to come back in a second.
I definitely was getting buffering that.
Well, he's back. Yep, you're back. You're moving. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, well, okay. Once we see what it does, then we can try and extrapolate why it does it. And then we can determine that it is relative buoyancy. But we don't need anything more than that. This thing is more dense than its surrounding medium, so it does drop, because that's what it does. We've seen it do that. We know it does that. We don't have to say it needs anything more than that, than what it does. We just know that it is more dense. And that's the end of the story. You don't need to then add to it.
You don't need to add more to it.
No, it just is what we observe, which we can deduce in accordance with laws of relative density.
Yeah, I wrote something down
Cool.
to respond to this, a thought experiment or intuition pump, I should say. I wrote, it's something like saying, why did the killer commit the murder? And then somebody responding, because no one stopped him. I think that was because he was dropping the thing, and you were saying it's falling because nobody's stopping it. So I guess that's not exactly what you're saying right now, but it was more about what you were saying before.
Well, no, the killer is applying an extra force that comes from the intention of the killer. Whereas when we're just observing nature, doing what nature does, are we really going to suggest that it has a similar sort of intention to something that's going against nature to want to kill something? Or are we just observing natural law, obeying natural law exactly as we've always observed it?
No, it was just an analogy. I'm not trying to imply that nature has intention. Yeah. So you're just fine with saying the balloon's going to fall because it has a higher relative buoyancy, and that's just that. Yeah,
higher relative density.
I just don't see how you could just be okay with leaving it that way. But I don't know how to try to convince you to want to ask more questions. Huh.
Well, but you can do tests. Like take a basketball, for example. It's got a lot of air compressed into it, so it's become a compressed air chamber. It's sort of like opposite of a vacuum chamber. It's a compressed air chamber, and that's what makes it firm and hard and whatever. Now, if you take that to a body of water, swimming pool or whatever, and you try and hold it underwater, then it's going to want to forcefully eject itself back up to the surface, and it will do so quite strongly. You have to use quite a lot of muscle mass to hold it under. And yet, in the medium of air, if you just let it go, it wants to drop and hit the ground. So why is it so forcefully wanting to go upwards in one medium and naturally wanting to drop in another? It's because of the relative density of the medium within which it's in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And then you could also then ask the question, why does it go up? That would be the appropriate response to that question. But it's still, we're leaving the question, why does it go down? We're not answering that one.
Well, so, no, I mean, it's still answered by the relative. It's still answered by the relative density compared to the medium. It's really straightforward.
But it doesn't
the density of the water is far more dense than air.
Like, why isn't it that when a substance is greater than, has a greater relative density, that it doesn't go up?
Well, because it doesn't. It's got a lesser relative density. Yeah, the density of water,
why not,
is more dense than the air.
Yeah.
So the air in the basketball is forcing it back up to where air goes, above the water. You know, all air bubbles rise, and so your basketball is basically a big air bubble, and it's got a compressed air in it, and so it's got more air, but it doesn't have more weight per volume than the water.
Right. All air bubbles rise. Why do air bubbles rise?
Less dense than water.
Less dense than water. Okay. Well, let's see what Heat Shield's saying. You're missing the crucial step. Why move at all? I mean, Heat Shield, we've been over that. Yeah, we're kind of looping here. Okay. Here's the thing I want to ask you about. Have you ever been outside of Australia?
Yeah.
On a different continent?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever thought about trying to do some kind of crowdfunding to do around the world trip, quote unquote?
Not really.
No,
because it's pretty straightforward with the way the planar Earth works. Is that the North Pole is the center, the equator is the middle, and Antarctica is the external surrounds. So we can go to all the continents, we can travel around the world, we can do all those things, just as we can walk around the block. Doesn't prove it's a sphere. We can go to all these places. But when you start going outwards, which is southwards, towards Antarctica, you're going to hit some pretty hostile conditions. You're going to hit massive amounts of ice, some severely freezing cold conditions. If you do get above an ice wall, you're going to meet some of the biggest mountains in the world. You've got no food, no fuel, no shelter. You've got to take everything with you. And it doesn't really serve any purpose to go there to kill yourself for what? What are you going to prove? You've got no internet connection there. You can't live stream to the rest of the world to show, look how I'm going to die. And assuming you did get to the other side, what then? Maybe you crossed a massive continent and then you're faced with another ocean. What boat did you bring with you to keep on going? It serves no purpose to travel across a frozen wasteland just to satisfy the curiosity of a few globers who can't understand the model that we think explains the world we live upon. We can travel all around the world. It proves nothing. What we would like to see, and what we've nearly tried to crowdfund in the past, is somebody flying directly south and keeps on going south, because you can't do it. It cannot be done. If you took off south from, say, Tasmania, from South America, from South Africa, and headed due south, and you didn't change the direction of your rudder, and you kept on going, it's never been done, and we would never see you again.
Okay, so here's my idea, right? This is what I really want to see happen. I want to get somebody who believes in flat Earth, such as yourself, to get on a plane with somebody like myself. And for instance, let's say we started here in America, where I am, and fly and live stream as much as possible, and at least record, right? The flights that we take from here to, let's say, here, and then, just hop around. Now, if the globe model is true, if they're not lying to us and all that, then while we're on these planes, for the vast majority of the time, except for during takeoff and landing when they're getting their bearings, the compasses that we're holding should be pointed the direction that they're telling us that we're going. And if we take the planes, if we take the flights the whole way around the globe, instead of going back anyway, then we should be recording our compasses going the same direction the whole way around the planet. And if the globe is really a sphere, then that compass should never, except for, of course, when we're landing for getting our bearings, go the other direction. And that should be proof positive that we've gone all the way around in a circle around a thing.
But if you understood the flat Earth model, then you would understand that the North Pole on that globe is how all our charts were originally drawn, because every compass, wherever you go, magnetic compass is always pointing to that. Right. So you don't have to imagine it being curved at all. If you just flatten it all out, then it still works, because your compass is still going to be pointing north that way. So east is still going in a big circle, or west is going in a big circle. You're still going to come back to where you started if you did it that way. That's why I say the only way that you can prove that we're a globe is to take off from somewhere deep south, bottom of South America, bottom of New Zealand, Tasmania, South Africa, and head due south. And then come back out the other side without changing the bearings once. Forget the compass. You have to ignore the compass. As soon as you take off south, you have to lock the steering of your airplane due south and keep going. And that is what has never been done. People have circumnavigated east-west millions of times. It's no big deal. But it's never been done heading due south. That's the important factor. And if you can do that, if we can crowdfund to do that, I will be on that flight. I will go there.
You would go on that. Okay. You're on record. You're on record. You all heard him.
Hell yeah. And I would even start my own GoFundMe to help do it, because some guy called Greater Sapien tried to do that some years back. He got over $20,000 worth of his subscribers' contributions to go on that flight. And then some months before the flight was due to happen, they just mysteriously cancelled it. No explanation. It just never happened, because it cannot be done. It is illegal to go there.
Well,
It's completely against every law of that mankind, the military and everything have set up to head due south over Antarctica. And they'll give you all sorts of excuses like, lack of fuel, you have to carry extra fuel and do all this blah, blah. There's every excuse under the world, but the Antarctic Treaty basically prevents anybody from going that far south. We can go any other direction. You can go straight over the North Pole, or pretty close to it anyway. Not a problem. That works for the flat Earth.
okay.
It's going south.
Well, I mean, that's fine. We now have a clear criteria, a set goalpost to establish as a matter of fact, which is what this channel is all about, what it would take to establish in your mind the globe model. And now we know what we have to do it. So that's what I'm going to
I would love to see it be done. I'd love to see it be done because it will never be done. It will never be done in my lifetime, in your lifetime, in your grandchildren's lifetime. You'll never, ever see anybody head off due south from any one of these most extreme southern places and keep going and be seen ever again.
I mean, we can argue till we're blue in the face. We can pull up sources and all this other stuff. And if we're epistemologically separated, then what are we going to do? We can just...
there are no sources.
We have to establish
these things for facts. If you can find a single flight, you will find some that will skim the edge of Antarctica. Say they're going from South America to Australia. They'll skim the edge and say, oh, we crossed Antarctica. But no, skimming the edge isn't the same as going due south and keep on going due south.
You wouldn't fly right over the South Pole. That's what you're saying.
There is no South Pole, but yeah, if you can, go for it.
Right. Okay. Well, that's the goalpost you're set, and I'm gonna try to cross it if I can. And
what we consider the South Pole
is see what that is.
Like a ring magnet. You've got a North Pole, no question about it. But South Pole is a massive ring, at least 80,000 miles around the known Earth, and there is no single polar spot. There's a ceremonial pole for photo shoots, but that means nothing.
Well, we're gonna go ahead and wind it down now. So Heat Shield has some things you want to say. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and just tag me, Factitionalist Network, and I'll ask him or I'll answer while I can. And
there you go. I got to get going soon too.
Yeah, understood. Heat Shield says resistance against what? A force, maybe? Air resistance, I think he's talking about when dropping objects in a vacuum chamber.
Yeah, like when the thing hits the ground, that's resistance because the ground has density. But until it hits the ground, there's no resistance, so it just drops until it hits it.
Okay.
I sort of credited Heat Shield with a bit more intelligence than that, but there you go.
So why not down? We talked about that. Why not sideways or up? We talked about that.
Yeah, because you got to be less dense in air to go
up. Sink toward.
And why not sideways on a spinning ball? Like everything should be falling sideways on a spinning ball because the ground should be moving so much faster than the thing can drop. Everything should be falling at a big slant. But it never happens because there is no motion of the ground.
I'm honestly, I did not catch that last part. I'm sorry. Yes, we do need a why, Ross. Why down? What pushes it down? Yeah, that's what I was trying to say. But
okay. Well,
do things move down just because they want to?
Because they're more dense than air. Do they move down in water? Only if they're more dense than water. Do they move down on the ground? No, because the ground offers resistance. So when you're in the medium of air and you're more dense than the air, you will go down.
Heat Shield says, Kaz, my resistance against what was about Ross saying, when you lift something up, you're providing resistance. What are you resisting when you are lifting something up? Like
well, you're resisting the mass of that bar. You've got the muscular strength and mass in your physical body to lift something, and you exert energy to do so. That is a force.
Okay. Well, Anybody else want to have any other questions? Then we're gonna go ahead and shut it down, guys. I really appreciate you joining me here for this and having this conversation with me, and
Yeah, no
getting to
worries.
hear your perspective. It's been interesting. As you know, obviously I don't agree, and I'm unconvinced. But now that I know what it would take to convince you, I will try to work hard to convince you, if I can.
Yeah, yeah. If you can show an invisible pulling force due to attraction of mass, that's apart from magnetism or electromagnetism or static electricity, I'd be happy to see it because it's clearly doesn't exist. It's extraneous to any laws of physics, and we
Well,
simply don't need it so long as we live in reality,
I know
observable reality.
somebody already asked you about the Cavendish experiment, right? In the Q&A, I think, and you
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
remember what you said about it. So
Oh, I said several things that debunk it. Yeah, the number one was the third one, which basically says, well, the gravity of Earth being so much bigger and greater than the big ball on either side of the experiment should override any force that the big ball has in the first place. The other one was that the balance beam, the torsion bar, is never going to be fully at rest anyway. So eventually something's going to bring it to rest one way or another. And if you got a ball either side of it, it's going to be coming to rest at one or the other of them. And so that could be proof of gravity. And the other one was that basically if something is a ball and it's in the medium of air, then you've always got air circulating around it. You know, air is a very fluid, very dynamic fluid, and it will eventually, over something just sitting in the air, build up a bit of a static charge around both things. And that static electricity could also explain why they seem to be attracted to one another without once having to invoke the the desire, the urge to have it be the attraction of mass due to mass alone.
gotcha. I do have one more thing from Sideshow Nav asks if you've brewed any beers lately.
Sure have,
Any
mate.
new beers lately?
I've been brewing some pretty good ones, and I finally had to bite the bullet actually, and I've got a new brewing container on the way. This one's going to be stainless steel, so
And
last one's second.
James Wolfe wants to know, why do you believe that giants may have constructed the moon?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I believe that that's what it would have taken if somebody had the wherewithal to think that they were as good as God and that they could recreate the sun here on Earth, or just to give us a permanent night light, for example, because they didn't want to have night, and so they were an absolute maniacal genius. Then they possibly had the same wherewithal to genetically bioengineer huge beings to do the handiwork for them. And I would suggest they would have had to be giants in order to make something the size of the moon, which I believe is about a 70-mile wide bauble sitting up there in our upper atmosphere against the firmament.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that is the last of the questions. So
That's a good one to end on.
Looks like you're gonna have a good night. I really appreciate you coming out and talking to me about this stuff.
No worries, Kes.
Yeah,
It was
I really
a pleasure.
appreciate it. You guys all have a great night. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining me on this evening. And I don't have a sign-off phrase yet, but I'm working on it. So good night.
See ya.